coming to the end of the week, getting closer to that all-important second scrimmage of training camp. That'll be on Saturday. And we're moving through the week here. There's one more full week of practice. Really, they practice next, let's see, they're off today. They practice Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They're off Monday, and then they practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then you have the kickoff luncheon next Friday. So, I mean, the end of training camp is coming up. It's really a week from today, I guess, would be the last practice of training camp. And then dog is trying to get in the video. You're not in the video, buddy. The last practice of training camp next Thursday. So it's coming up quick. And I figure we go around and hit on a bunch of different topics here. Obviously, we have the mailbag coming tomorrow here on the Morning Pitt. So you can submit your questions on the message board at Panther-Lair.com. That's where we take the questions for the mailbag. So we'll hit on a bunch of stuff tomorrow. But there were a couple interesting things Pat Narduzzi talked about yesterday, a couple sort of individual things, personnel things, position moves, and maybe position battles, and one other spot that I've been wanting to talk about. So I figure we'll hit on a couple of different topics. We'll talk about one position move that's notable for a couple of reasons. We'll talk about one position that's got more of a battle than we expected it to, and then one position that might be better than it has been for the past couple of years. So we're kind of going around the horn a little bit. Not totally around the horn. It's only 3 topics and not 4. We're kind of going around, hitting on some different personnel stuff. Let's jump into it here on the Thursday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Thursday. It's the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You see the website below, Panther-Lair.com. It's a Pitt sign on the 24/7 Sports Network where you can get all the Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, transfer, everything coverage that you could possibly handle. And, of course, message boards to talk to other Pitt fans. All day, every day, Pitt fans are hanging out on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, talking to you about Pitt sports, talking with each other about Pitt sports. So if you're a Pitt fan, you want to join the best online community of Pitt fans, that's the place to do it. Panther-Lair.com and our YouTube channel here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, the place we have all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m., post-game shows, press conferences, interviews, practice highlights, all those things. You find it right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure you like this video and subscribe, and that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video coverage and content, because we got a lot of it. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. All right, first thing, a position move, something of a position move, transition move, trying something out, testing it out a little bit. Came out yesterday. Pat Narduzzi said it, and then it was seen at training camp. Jim was down there covering practice yesterday, so I wasn't there, but Jim saw it. And Jesse Anderson, the safety, redshirt sophomore safety, Jesse Anderson, getting some work at wide receiver. Or redshirt freshman safety, Jesse Anderson. Excuse me. He played a little bit last year. No, he's a redshirt sophomore. I don't know why I'm mixed up. He didn't play at all in 2023. I think he was hurt a little bit. 2024, he played on special teams, a little bit at reserve safety. But he was in the position, or maybe continues to be in position, for a depth chart spot at safety. I think when you look at the safety position, you've got Javon McIntyre and Cruz Brookins at the top of the list. And then you've got a handful of guys sort of jockeying for those positions behind them. And we've talked about this a few different times. Largely, when we've talked about Josh Garrier. We talked 2 days ago. I think we talked about some of the freshmen who were unlikely to redshirt, and Josh Garrier, the freshman safety, was one that we mentioned. And part of it, we talked about the depth at safety and the talent at safety and how Garrier had kind of forced himself into that conversation. Safety remains one of the strongest and most talented and deepest positions on the team. It's been like that for a while, and this year looks no different. As a matter of fact, it might even be deeper this year than it has been in the last few years. And that's saying something, because they've been really good at safety for a while. But with Gurrier's emergence, the addition of Kavir Baines-Marquez as a transfer, Alan Bryant playing well, and he's a guy that we've mentioned a few times, haven't talked as much about him, but I think he's a guy that the coaches really like. They like his potential and his future. Obviously, Cole Woodson, a true freshman, you shouldn't need him this year. But with all those guys, and maybe a need for playmakers at wide receiver, or maybe just looking for an opportunity to get a really good athlete on the field, they're giving Jesse Anderson a look at wide receiver. And Jim said it was kind of interesting yesterday because he had the takeaway stickers on his helmet, which is for the defensive guys. But he had those on while he was running routes and catching passes. Look, Jesse Anderson was a good receiver in high school. I think he had 1,000 receiving yards over the course of his career. He was a productive player there. I think when we were at Rivals listed him as a wide receiver recruit all the way through the recruiting process, even though Pitt was always on him as a safety. So he's always had that ability to play on both sides of the ball. Pitt had him focused on safety. That was his main position. And I think he was going to be part of that depth there this season. And he still could. I don't know if this is a permanent move just yet. We'll kind of see how that develops. But it's interesting to see him getting a look there. And while, like I said, maybe they feel like they could use another playmaker or receiver, I think there's 3 possible explanations for why you would give Jesse Anderson a look at wide receiver, right? There's, a reason related to the depth at safety, a reason related to the depth at receiver, and a reason related to just finding a way to get Jesse Anderson an opportunity to play. And I would say if I was going to rank those 3, it would probably, the depth at receiver would probably be the 3rd reason. I don't, they could always use more receivers and talented receivers and everything like that, but they've got a decent amount of bodies there. And I think they've got a decent amount of explosive players at receiver. Kenny Johnson and Blue Hicks and Raphael Williams and Zion Fowlerell and Deuce Spann and Sincere Lee and, Tony Kinsler and on down the list. I'm sure I skipped a name there that was, obvious. I mean, you go down into the freshman Bryce Yates and Cameron Sapp or also Tyreek Robinson, redshirt freshman. So, I mean, they've got a bunch of guys there. It's not like, they're so desperate and hurting at wide receiver that they need to find any solution that they can. So I'd put that at the bottom of the list of why they would make such a move or consider such a move. Most likely, I think it's probably a combination of those other 2 reasons that I mentioned, the depth at safety and the, looking for an opportunity for Jesse Anderson to get on the field. As I just said, I mean, they're kind of loaded at safety, really talented and really deep. Cruz Brookins and Javon McIntyre, backed up by Kavir Baines-Marquez. And, Anderson would have slotted into that spot, although Pat Narduzzi said yesterday he's probably number 6 at this point. So you're Brookins and McIntyre, Baines-Marquez and Allen Bryant, or maybe Baines-Marquez and Josh Garrier, Allen Bryant. I mean, that's your top 5 guys according to Pat Narduzzi yesterday. And so you've got Jesse Anderson, talented athlete, a guy who you feel like can help you a lot and make plays and be really good on special teams. And no need to have him wasting away as the number 6 safety, not getting as many opportunities as some of those other guys. I mean, there was a point where I felt like Jesse Anderson would be that extra defensive back they bring in their 3rd down defensive sub package. They like to, when it gets to 3rd down, obvious passing situations, take a defensive lineman off the field. And more often than not, they would bring in an extra safety. And that safety would almost sort of line up like an outside linebacker. They called it the star linebacker in the Delta package is what they called it. And so it was effectively like a 3-4 defense kind of with the way they lined up, formation-wise. But if not personnel-wise, because it was a safety and not a linebacker coming in there. But on certain occasions where I assume Jesse Anderson would be that guy. Cruz Brookins filled that role last year. Javon McIntyre has done it in the past. We've seen different safeties kind of step into that role. And so I thought Jesse Anderson would be that guy. But what they've done on a couple of occasions, most notably 2021 with John Patrician, is bring in an extra linebacker and actually play it like a 3-4 or something like a 3-4. We always used to think of it as a nickel, but it's really, personnel-wise, particularly when they had John Patrician out there, it was closer to a 3-4 defense with 3 down linemen, 4 linebackers, 2 corners, and 2 safeties. I think that idea has been tossed around. Easy, buddy. Sorry, the dog is really, he's really desperate for attention here. He really wants to be on the video. It's okay, buddy. I think what's been tossed around this year is the possibility of using 4 linebackers again, going to what they did in 2021 when they had John Patrician. And I think it's because they have guys like Kyle Lewis who could potentially play at that outside spot. Kyle Lewis could play like John Patrician did. You could have 3 linebackers plus Kyle Lewis either rushing or dropping into coverage because he's that good of an athlete. And that's, I think that combined with the depth at safety, combined with just liking Jesse Anderson as an athlete, looking for an opportunity to get him on the field, all of that rolls together to maybe lead to this position move, or at least considering it and looking at it and giving it a try and seeing what they think. So that's interesting, and we'll keep an eye on that. Obviously, that safety position still really strong. I think it's even better if you have Jesse Anderson at safety, but they sort of have almost an embarrassment of riches, even though Josh Garrier and Allen Bryant are really unproven. Cruz Brookins is a brand new starter. Kavir Baines-Marquez just transferred in. It feels like they are really strong at safety and maybe can afford to give one of their guys to the wide receivers if they feel like he can make plays. The other position that Pat Narduzzi talked about yesterday, and I thought his comments were really interesting because I think it probably changes a little bit of the perspective that we have on this position, is tight end. Because Pat Narduzzi said Jake Overman, quote, is in a battle with Marshall transfer Justin Holmes. And that's interesting because, look, I'll be the first to admit, and I don't think I'm alone in this regard, that when they added Justin Holmes as a tight end transfer from Marshall after spring camp ended, the expectations were pretty low for what he was going to be able to contribute. He seemed like a bigger kind of guy, maybe a guy who would be, a fullback type. People talked about, maybe he could be a fullback and or something like that. I want to find what they list him at height-wise. So Pitt lists him at 6'3", 245. I think Marshall, actually, that's the one I wanted to find. Marshall listed him, I just want to bring up his height and weight, at 6 foot. All right, 6 foot 241. Pitt lists him at 6'3", 245. Having seen him in person, I don't know if he's 6'3", but he's closer to 6'3" than he is to 6 foot. I don't know what Marshall was doing listing him at that height. I forget if Pat Narduzzi made that joke or if Jacob Bernowski, the tight ends coach, made that joke when I talked to him. But like, nobody can really figure out why Marshall listed him at 6 foot, because at 6 foot 241, he seems like a fullback. He seems like a Daniel Carter big back, and that's not what Pitt uses. This offense doesn't really use that. But a 6'3", 235 H-back tight end type, well, that's a different story. And it's really interesting. I'm sort of reminded of when I talked to Jacob Bernowski on Media Day, and I just asked, this Justin Holmes guy, how does he fit in? Obviously, you needed a body at tight end because you had Jake Overman and Malachi Thomas coming back, Max Hunt coming in as a freshman. I can understand why you would want to add a tight end to sort of fill out the numbers there, but how's he fit? Is he really going to help you? And Bernowski was like, this is the kind of guy that we needed, because, yes, he transferred from Marshall where he had a minimal role in the passing game. He was mostly a run blocker, didn't really play that much. And again, they listed him at 6 foot 241. Maybe they didn't play him that much because they thought he was only 6 feet tall. But at Kent State, playing in an offense that by Bernowski's description is similar to Pitt's offense 2 years ago, he was actually used quite a bit. Ran about 200 passing routes, caught like 20 passes and was targeted about 28 times. Decent production, solid production. And as it turns out, the guy who's 6'3", 235, actually a pretty good athlete and somewhat explosive. Jacob Bernowski, again, the tight ends coach, told me that he can broad jump 9'6", that he got that report from the strength coach, Mike Stacchiotti, and had to call up the strength coach and said, Stack, is this a typo or something? He can broad jump 9'6"? What are you talking about? But that's what kind of player he is. He's a sneaky athlete. Kind of surprises you, I think, particularly if you just look at the measurables on paper, the height and weight, particularly if you look at his measurables from when he was at Marshall when he was 6 foot and 241. Fortunately for Pitt, he grew 3 inches and lost 6 pounds. But he's a better athlete than you probably give him credit for, and we've seen it show up. We've seen him make plays, make impressive catches during practice. They put it on their social media a little bit that, hey, there might actually be something here. This guy might actually be able to help them in the passing game more than probably we anticipated. And what Pat Narduzzi said yesterday seems to indicate that's the case, that Justin Holmes might really be able to contribute in the passing game and maybe is even battling Jake Overman and Malachi Thomas for snaps. Now, I don't know how it's all going to shake out. It's August 14th. It's 12, 13 days into camp. Crazy things start happening and being said, and when the dust settles, you end up with a depth chart that ordered the way you expected it to. But whereas we once thought of Justin Holmes as maybe or maybe not having a role, it now looks like you're leaning pretty heavily towards him having a role. And what's going to be interesting to see is how they mix and match Holmes, Overman, and Malachi Thomas, because they each have sort of unique skill sets. Malachi Thomas is probably the biggest receiving threat out of the three, but they can all catch passes. Like I've often used the word useful with Jake Overman, that he ended up being more useful than I expected him to be last year. Holmes has a history of being successful and effective as a pass catcher at Kent State, and maybe in this kind of offense might be able to even do more than he did 2 years ago. And then Thomas, I think, clearly played well enough as a true freshman to earn playing time all year long, burn his red shirt. And so the coaches obviously like his potential there. And I think he could be a real matchup threat, if he's going out against linebackers or even safeties. So it's an interesting group that's probably even more interesting than we've given it credit for, or more interesting than we assumed. And in large part, that's due to Justin Holmes turning out to be more useful and perhaps more of a contributor and more of an athlete than we expected him to be. So it's a very interesting development there at tight end. And then the last guy I want to talk about, the last one I wanted to mention, I said at the beginning there was a position change to talk about, a position that's maybe more interesting than we expected, and a position that might be better than we expected. And it's the punter. It's Caleb Junko. By his own admission, he hasn't been good enough and hasn't been consistent enough over the last 2 years. He has said that. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know anything about punting, right? What can I tell you about punting? If I'm watching somebody punt, what are the things I can really break down and analyze? I can tell you if it goes really high. I can tell you if it stays up in the air a long time. I can tell you if it goes really far, right? And I'm not going to pretend like I can tell you more than that. But I can tell you that in practice so far over the past 2.5 weeks or whatever it's been, 2 weeks plus a day or two, Caleb Junko's punts have been going really high. They've been staying up there really long, and they've been going really far. And, he said that I think in the scrimmage on Saturday, he averaged more than 5 seconds of hang time. I mean, he is just putting it up there, having some booming kicks. I've heard his teammates get excited about him. Not just the coaches like, oh, great kick, Caleb, but like his teammates like shouting him out like that was some kind of kick. I've heard swear words used to express their excitement about how well Junko has punted in camp. And look, you got to do it in the games. I think there's probably a mental aspect for Junko over the last 2 years, where in the games he has kind of struggled a little bit. The pressure and guys that are rushing and all those things. And you got to be able to do it then. But for now, in practice at least, Junko looks like he's punting as well as he ever has, and maybe better than he ever has. And just because I compiled these stats and I wasn't sure what else to do with them, a little interesting comparison over the last 2 seasons. If you look at the opposing team's average starting field position after a punt, 2 years ago, 2023, it was right around the 29. The opponent's 29. Last year, it was right around the 27. So he got a little bit better last year. He, pinned him back 2 yards deeper. I did another study of last year's punts, and if the opponent started inside the 25, inside their own 25, after a punt, they scored a touchdown or kicked a field goal or had a field goal attempt on 28% of their drives. If they got outside the 25, now, and I mean, like, this is all obvious. The closer you are to the end zone, the more scoring opportunities you're going to get. But if they got outside the 25, Pitt's opponents had scored touchdowns, kicked field goals, or attempted field goals on 48.5% of their possessions. So 20 percentage points more. 28% if you can pin them inside the 25 that they score or have an opportunity to score. Almost 50% of the drives that start outside the 25 end up in touchdowns or field goals or field goal attempts. Now, that's pretty obvious stuff, but I think it does. Now, and those are just drives after punts. We're not even talking about kickoff drives. I'm just talking about after punts, although that kind of breakdown of inside the 25, outside the 25 might speak to why my longstanding policy of you should just kick it as far as you can and take the touchback on kickoffs is maybe not as good, because you want to try and pin them back. But I digress. The importance of punting is huge. It can be a difference maker. It has been a difference maker. There have been games that I think they've lost because they haven't punted well. I think the Wake Forest game 2 years ago, there was a shanked punt or two that had a lot to do with that loss. Caleb Junko knows that. He takes responsibility for it. But I think he's doing well this year. I think he's doing well so far in camp, and it seems like it should translate over to the season. Pat Narduzzi said that Caleb Junko is a guy that he just doesn't feel like he has to worry about. So there's some confidence there. And, maybe Junko can finish his career on a high note after a lot of inconsistency, a lot of low notes, right? All right, we got the Morning Pitt mailbag tomorrow, so get your questions in on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. We always look forward to doing that, so take as many questions as we possibly can get. And I think that's about it. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. No practice today, so we won't have any practice report. We'll still have articles and interviews and photos and videos and all those kind of things. And then Pitt will be back at it in the South Side tomorrow for the final practice before their second scrimmage of spring, which will be on Saturday. So stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com for all the coverage from the South Side, Panther-Lair.com, the Pitt site on the 24/7 Sports Network. Thanks so much for tuning in today. Hope you've had a great week so far. Enjoy your Thursday, and we'll catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.